He was known as the Winter Duke, a man whose heart was as cold and barred as his January estate. Alistair Vane, Duke of Ashworth, was a man of duty, not passion, and his duty required an heir. But a family will stipulated he must marry by his 30th birthday or lose his fortune to a cousin he despised. With the deadline looming, he found a solution. A desperate, educated gentlewoman with debts to her name. He would hire Miss Saraphina Harding for 1 season, a duchess in name only. It was a simple contract, but neither of them ever planned on the fine print of the heart. The summons had felt like a mistake. Saraphina Harding stared at the thick, cream-coloured card, her name penned in an imposing, masculine hand. Grierson and Peabody, solicitors. It had been delivered to the back door of the Dowager Lady Harrington's oppressive Mayfair townhouse, where Saraphina served as a companion, a role that was 1 part reader, 2 parts servant. Her life had become a series of muted greys. Since her father, a clergyman with a scholar's mind and a gambler's secret vice, had passed, Saraphina and her younger sister Clara were left destitute. The vicarage was gone, their belongings sold. Clara was now boarding with a distant, judgmental aunt, while Saraphina endured Lady Harrington's daily tyrannies for a pittance. Every shilling was saved in the desperate hope of rescuing Clara. That afternoon, Lady Harrington was in a particularly foul mood. "Miss Harding, you are dawdling, and your posture is appalling. One would think you were raised in a barn, not a vicarage." "My apologies, Lady Harrington," Saraphina murmured, her eyes fixed on the letter hidden in her apron pocket. When she was finally granted 2 hours for personal errands, she fled the house. The offices of Grierson and Peabody were imposing, all dark mahogany and the smell of old paper and wealth. A clerk, Mr. Finch, looked down his nose at her worn, if clean, grey muslin dress. "Miss Harding, you are expected." She was shown into a vast, silent office. A man stood at the window, staring out at the London rain. He was tall, impossibly so, and built not with the softness of a drawing-room aristocrat, but with the hard lines of someone who spent time outdoors. As he turned, Saraphina felt the air leave her lungs. It was Alistair Vane, the Duke of Ashworth. She had seen his likeness in the papers. He was notoriously wealthy, notoriously reclusive, and notoriously unmarried. His face was a masterpiece of cold geometry, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the colour of a winter sky. "Miss Harding," he said. His voice was a low baritone, devoid of any warmth. He did not ask her to sit. Beside him sat the solicitor, Mr. Julian Grierson, who cleared his throat. "Miss Harding, thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a proposal of a delicate nature to discuss." Saraphina's hands, hidden in her thin gloves, clenched. "A proposal, sir? I believe you must have me mistaken for someone else. I am a companion to Lady Harrington. I have no connections that would warrant the attention of your firm, or His Grace." The Duke spoke, cutting through the pleasantries. "You are the daughter of the late Reverend Arthur Harding. You are educated. You speak fluent French and passable Italian. You play the pianoforte, and you are 24 years old. You are also, correct me if I am wrong, in significant financial distress." Saraphina flushed, a hot, angry crimson. "My situation is not a matter for public discussion, Your Grace." "It is not public, it is private, and it is the entire point," Alistair said. He moved from the window to the desk, placing his hands on it. He looked at her, not as a man looks at a woman, but as a man looks at a chess piece. "My grandfather's will is specific. I must be respectably married by my 30th birthday, which is in 3 months, at the end of the London season. Should I fail, The entirety of the Ashworth fortune and estates passed to my cousin, Lord Barnaby Crestwood. I will not allow that to happen." Seraphina was completely lost. "I am sorry for your predicament, Your Grace, but I do not see how this concerns me." "Because, Miss Harding, I require a wife, temporarily." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a grand carriage clock. Seraphina stared at him, certain she had misheard. Mr. Grierson intervened, his voice softer. "His Grace is proposing a marriage of convenience, Miss Harding. A business arrangement." Alistair Vane took over, his tone chillingly pragmatic. "You will marry me. You will perform the duties of the Duchess of Ashworth for the season. You will smile, attend balls, and convince my trustees, Mr. Grierson chief among them, that ours is a legitimate union. At the end of the season, once the inheritance is secure, we will begin the arrangement for a quiet, amicable separation, an annulment, perhaps, or a long-term residence in the country. In return, I will settle the entirety of your late father's debts, which, according to our research, amount to over £6,000. I will also settle a sum of £20,000 on you as a widow's portion, so to speak. You and your sister will be secure for life." £6,000. It was a sum so vast it made her sick. It was the monster under her bed, the reason she tolerated Lady Harrington, the fear that kept her awake at night. And £20,000. It was freedom. It was a cottage for her and Clara. It was a life. But the cost— "You are asking me to sell myself," Seraphina whispered, the shame burning her throat. "I am asking you to play a role," the Duke corrected, his face impassive. "You are an educated woman. Surely you understand a contract. I am offering you a very good one. I have no interest in you physically, Miss Harding. My affections are not part of the bargain. This is a chaste arrangement. You will have your own rooms. You will be a duchess in title and in nothing else until the contract is fulfilled." "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. "Because you are perfect," he stated, as if discussing livestock. "You are a gentlewoman, so society will accept you. You are unknown, so you have no prior attachments or scandals. And you are poor, which makes you motivated. Lady Harrington is a notorious gossip. My cousin Lord Barnaby is a vulture. The performance must be flawless." Seraphina thought of Clara, her letters increasingly unhappy. She thought of the leering gaze of Lady Harrington's nephew, whom the old woman was pushing on her. This Duke was cold, but he was offering her an escape, not a cage. A different kind of cage, perhaps, but one with a gilded door and a key. "The debts," Seraphina said, her voice hardening. "They must be paid in full before the wedding, all of them. There is one to a Mr. Silas Croft, a moneylender. It is the most pressing." A flicker of respect, or perhaps just surprise, entered the Duke's wintry eyes. "It will be done. Our researches were thorough. Mr. Croft will be paid by tomorrow." She stood straighter, pulling the last of her pride around her like a shield. "And my sister Clara. I wish for her to be removed from our aunt's home and enrolled at the Mrs. Applegate's Seminary for young ladies, with her tuition paid for the next 3 years. Alistair inclined his head. "A reasonable addendum. It will be done." She looked at this cold, magnificent man. He was offering her a devil's bargain, a lie wrapped in silks and titles, but he was also offering her the one thing she craved more than air: security for Clara. "Then I find, Your Grace," Seraphina Harding said, her voice clear and steady, "that I accept your terms. It is a business arrangement. Nothing more." The Duke nodded once. Excellent. Mr. Grierson has the papers. You will leave Lady Harrington's service immediately. A carriage will collect you in 1 hour. You will be taken to my sister's London house to prepare. The wedding will be by special license in 2 days. He turned back to the window, his dismissal absolute. Saraphina signed the papers, her hand shaking only slightly. She had just sold her name, her honour, and her next 3 months to the Winter Duke. The next 48 hours were a blur of bewildering velocity. Saraphina was extracted from Lady Harrington's house with the clinical precision of a military operation. A terse note, penned by the Duke's secretary, informed the Dowager that Miss Harding's services were no longer required, as she was to become the Duchess of Ashworth. Saraphina rather wished she could have seen the old woman's face. She was deposited at Vane House, a monolithic palace of pale stone overlooking Hyde Park. Here she was introduced to Lady Beatrice Vane, Alistair's younger sister. Where the Duke was winter, Beatrice was a sudden, chaotic spring. "You must be Saraphina. Oh, I am so glad Alistair has finally done something interesting," Beatrice cried, clasping both of Saraphina's hands. She was a whirlwind of blonde curls and breathless enthusiasm. "He is impossible, you know. Utterly impossible. But you are lovely, and we have so much to do. The wedding is tomorrow, and the season is upon us, and you have nothing to wear." Saraphina was swept into a vortex of dressmakers, modistes, and jewellers. Madame Dubois, the French couturière, descended upon her, clucking her tongue at Saraphina's worn muslin. "No, this will not do. For the Duchess of Ashworth, we must have silks, we must have velvet, we must have life." For hours Saraphina was pinned, measured, and draped in fabrics so luxurious they felt alien against her skin. Emerald green velvets, ice blue silks, and delicate morning gowns of lawn and lace. A heavy box arrived from the Vane vaults. Inside, nestled on dark blue velvet, was the Ashworth diamond parure, a necklace, earrings, and tiara of breathtaking fire. "This was his mother's," Beatrice said, her voice soft for the first time. "He must care for you, at least a little, to let you wear this." Saraphina touched the cold stones. "It is part of the costume, Beatrice, to make the performance believable." Beatrice looked at her, confused. "Performance?" Saraphina quickly covered her mistake. "The performance of being a duchess, I mean. It is all so new." The wedding was a cold, private affair in the Duke's library, attended only by Beatrice and a grim-faced Mr. Grierson as witnesses. Alistair Vane, looking severe in a black frock coat, recited his vows in the same dispassionate tone he'd used to negotiate her price. Saraphina, dressed in a simple cream travelling suit, gave her responses, her voice a low murmur. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, there was an awkward pause. Alistair looked at her. He leaned in, and his lips brushed her cheek. The contact was brief, dry, and as impersonal as the signing of a deed. And just like that, she was Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashworth. They left immediately for the Duke's primary seat, Ashworth Park in Berkshire. The journey was spent in near total silence. The Duke read a book on agricultural reform, and Saraphina watched the green countryside roll by, feeling like a ghost. Ashworth Park was magnificent, a sprawling Jacobean masterpiece of honey-coloured stone and countless chimneys. But it was, as she had expected, cold. The staff, led by a formidable housekeeper named Mrs. Gable, lined up in the entrance hall. Mrs. Gable's eyes swept over Saraphina, lingering on her simple suit, and her disapproval was palpable. "Welcome to Ashworth, Your Grace," Mrs. Gable said, her voice stiff with scepticism. The staff had been expecting a great society beauty, a duke's daughter, not a penniless companion plucked from obscurity. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Saraphina replied, holding her head high. "I look forward to getting to know the house." As promised, she was given her own suite of rooms, a beautiful, sprawling apartment in the east wing, connected by a heavy, locked door to the Duke's own apartments. The first night, she dined alone in her sitting room, the Duke having sent word that he was occupied with estate matters. The next morning, he summoned her to his study. It was, she noted, the first time they had been truly alone since the wedding. "Saraphina," he began, using her given name for the first time. It sounded foreign in his mouth. "We have 3 days until my sister arrives with the first wave of guests for the season. We must establish our narrative." He sat behind his massive desk, a fortress of mahogany. "You will tell everyone that we met at a small clerical charity event your father used to patronize, that it was a sudden acquaintance that deepened quickly, that we married quietly due to the recentness of your mourning period. Is that clear?" "It is a plausible lie," Saraphina agreed, standing before him. "It is not a lie. It is a story," he corrected. "Now the staff, Mrs. Gable in particular. She has been with my family since before I was born. She is loyal, but she is observant. You must win her over." "And how do you suggest I do that, Your Grace?" "By demonstrating my expertise in silk and diamonds." His eyes narrowed. "By demonstrating your competence. You are the Duchess. You will take the keys. You will manage the menus, the guest lists, the household. My mother's journals are in the library. They detail the running of this house. I suggest you read them." He was handing her a job, a role to perform. This, she understood. This was no different from managing Lady Harrington's social calendar, only on an infinitely grander scale. "I will not fail you, Your Grace," she said. "See that you do not," he replied, turning to his ledgers. "My sister will expect you to join her for rides. You do ride?" "Yes." "Good. A groom will have a horse ready for you tomorrow. That is all." Saraphina spent the next 2 days in a fever of activity. She devoured the late Duchess's journals. She met with Mrs. Gable, her new knowledge on display. She discussed menus with the chef, Mr. Harding, a coincidence that made her smile, and inspected the linen closets. Mrs. Gable was resistant at first, her answers short. "Mrs. Gable," Saraphina said firmly, holding the heavy ring of household keys, "I understand your loyalty to this house and to the Duke. I am not his mother. I am his wife. I intend to see this household run to his standard. I will require your full cooperation to do so. Shall we begin with the preparations for Lady Beatrice's guests?" Mrs. Gable stared at her for a long moment, then gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Very good, Your Grace. The East Wing guest rooms must be aired." The small victory felt larger than it was. On the 3rd day, she went riding. The horse, a spirited bay mare named Willow, was a welcome relief. As she galloped across the damp morning fields, Saraphina felt a sliver of her old self return. She was rounding the edge of a small wood when she saw him, mounted on a massive black stallion. The Duke. He was not in his severe London coats, but in rugged riding leathers. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable. "You ride well," he commented, his voice lacking its usual iciness. "My father believed it was good for the constitution," she said, patting Willow's neck. "Willow was my mother's," he said, his gaze distant. "She suits you." An awkward silence fell. She was his wife. They were strangers. "Your sister arrives today," Saraphina said, trying to fill the void. "She does. And with her, the season truly begins," Alistair said, his face hardening again, as duty recalled itself. "Remember your role, Duchess. The first test is about to begin." He wheeled his stallion around and galloped back toward the house, leaving her alone in the grey morning mist. The house party began, and Ashworth Park, which had been as silent as a tomb, suddenly erupted with life. Beatrice arrived with a coterie of friends, all bright young things of the ton, loud with laughter and gossip. They descended upon Saraphina with avid curiosity. "A whirlwind romance! How utterly thrilling!" exclaimed Lady Caroline, a pretty but vapid debutante. "And with the Winter Duke, of all people, you must tell us everything." Saraphina, gowned in a deep blue velvet that Alistair had personally and tersely approved, smiled with a poise she hadn't known she possessed. "I'm afraid it's not so thrilling, Lady Caroline. His Grace and I share a passion for botany." It was a very quiet courtship. She had found that mentioning a shared, dull hobby was the fastest way to end an interrogation. The true test came that evening, at the first formal dinner. Saraphina sat at the head of the long table, the Ashworth diamonds cold against her throat. Alistair was at the other end, a remote, imposing figure. Halfway through the fish course, a late arrival was announced. Lord Barnaby Crestwood. Seraphina's head snapped up. She watched the man enter. He was the opposite of his cousin, of medium height, with a fashionable waistcoat, a charming smile, and eyes that were too clever. He was the man who stood to gain everything if she and Alistair failed. "Alistair, my dear cousin, forgive my lateness. The roads are atrocious," Barnaby said, gliding to the Duke's end of the table. "And you must be the new Duchess." He walked the length of the table to her, took her hand, and bowed over it, his smile never wavering. "An absolute vision. My cousin is a man of hidden depths. To think he found you all on his own. Where did he find you, Your Grace?" The question was casual, but the barb was sharp. Before Saraphina could answer, Alistair's cold voice cut across the table. "She was with Lady Harrington, a companion. Though I fail to see how my wife's previous employment is a suitable topic for dinner, Barnaby." The rebuke was swift and public. Barnaby laughed, seemingly unfazed. No, of course not. A love match. How refreshing. I am merely surprised. Alistair has never been one for surprises." The dinner continued, but the tension was thick. Saraphina felt Barnaby's eyes on her all evening, probing, assessing, searching for a flaw in the facade. Later in the drawing room, Barnaby cornered her by the pianoforte. "You play, Duchess?" "I do, my lord." "Then play for us. Play something with passion. I am eager to see what fire my cold cousin finds so alluring." It was a trap. If she played poorly, she was unaccomplished. If she played with too much passion, she was a fraud. Saraphina sat, her back straight. She chose a piece by Scarlatti, complex, technical, and brilliant, but emotionally restrained. She played it flawlessly. When she finished, there was polite applause. Alistair was watching her, his expression unreadable. "Technically perfect," Barnaby murmured, close to her ear. "As expected. My cousin values precision above all." Saraphina was unnerved. He was too smart, too observant. The next day was the local hunt assembly. It was Seraphina's first public appearance with the Duke on her arm. As they prepared to leave, Alistair stopped her in the hall. He adjusted the clasp of her cloak, his fingers brushing her neck. The touch was accidental, but it sent a jolt through her, sharp and unexpected. He seemed to feel it too. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "The trustees will be present tonight," he said, his voice rough. "Mr. Grierson and 2 others. Lord Barnaby will be watching. We must be convincing." I understand, Your Grace. A devoted couple. Yes. The assembly hall was crowded. As they entered, a hush fell. All eyes were on the Winter Duchess. Saraphina kept her smile in place, her hand resting lightly on Alistair's arm. "They are staring," she murmured. "Let them stare," he replied, his voice low. "You are the Duchess of Ashworth. You are above them." His words were meant to be a reminder of her role, but they landed as a strange, unexpected comfort. When the music for the first waltz began, he turned to her. "We must dance." "Of course." He led her to the floor. She had danced with him once before, at their wedding, a stiff, formal quadrille. But this was a waltz. He placed one hand on her waist, the other engulfing hers. The proximity was startling. He smelled of soap and crisp linen and something faintly outdoorsy. They moved together with surprising grace. He was an excellent, if unenthusiastic, dancer. But to her shock, Saraphina found herself relaxing. The tension of the last few days began to drain away. "You look pale," he observed, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "Are you unwell?" "I am merely tired, Your Grace. It has been a significant adjustment." "I see." They danced in silence for another minute. Then she took a risk. "You said we met over a shared love of botany. What is your favorite?" He looked surprised by the question. "My favorite? A strange topic for a ballroom." "We must be convincing," she reminded him. A small, almost invisible smile touched his lips. "The Helleborus niger. The Christmas rose. It blooms in the dead of winter when nothing else is willing to." Saraphina looked up at him. "A flower that thrives in the cold. How fitting, Your Grace." His expression tightened, the smile vanishing. He seemed about to say something sharp when the music ended. But as they walked off the floor, Lord Barnaby approached, his eyes glittering. "A beautiful performance, cousins. You almost look as though you enjoy each other's company." "Barnaby," Alistair said, his voice dropping a degree colder. "Find someone else to bother." Alistair steered Saraphina toward the alcove where Beatrice and Mr. Grierson were standing. "Ah, Duke, Duchess," Grierson said, bowing. "A lovely sight. A very lovely sight indeed." Alistair's hand, which had been on the small of her back, squeezed gently. A signal. The performance is working. But as Saraphina smiled at the solicitor, she realized with a sinking feeling that the warmth she felt on her back was not entirely a performance. And across the room, she saw Lord Barnaby watching them, his charming smile gone, replaced by a look of cold, calculating suspicion. He had seen the crack in the ice, and he knew it wasn't just for show. The move to London signaled the true start of the season. Vane House, which had been a place of silent transition for Saraphina, was now the epicenter of their campaign. The Duke, true to his word, had launched a full-scale assault to establish his happy marriage. Their debut was at the Devonshire House Ball, the most exclusive event of the year. Saraphina, descending the grand staircase on Alistair's arm, felt like the impostor she was. She was wearing a gown of oyster-shell silk, embroidered with thousands of tiny seed pearls. The Ashworth diamonds blazed at her throat. "You are trembling," Alistair murmured, his hand tightening on hers at the crook of his elbow. "I am unaccustomed to such scrutiny," she whispered back, "or such finery. I feel like a dressed-up doll." "You are the Duchess of Ashworth," he replied, the familiar refrain. "Look at them as if they are beneath you. It is what they expect." He was right. As she lifted her chin, adopting a mask of cool indifference, the whispers changed from "Who is she?" to "How elegant." They were a roaring success. The Winter Duke was seen smiling, or at least not actively scowling. He fetched her lemonade. He stood by her side. He dutifully danced the required waltzes with her. It was a masterful performance. But Lord Barnaby Crestwood was not so easily fooled. He had been spending his time not at balls, but in the less reputable corners of London, digging into the past of the new Duchess. A few days later, Saraphina was hosting her first afternoon tea. It was a dreadful, necessary affair, filled with sharp-eyed society matrons. Lady Harrington, Seraphina's former employer, was there, her face a mask of sour envy. Barnaby arrived late, all apologies and charm. He accepted a cup of tea from Seraphina's hand, his smile oily. "Dear Duchess," he said, his voice carrying in a sudden lull, "I was just speaking with your dear friend, Lady Harrington. She was telling me the most fascinating story. How you were in her employ one day, and engaged to a duke the next. A true fairy tale." The room went silent. The clink of a teaspoon sounded like a gunshot. Lady Harrington sniffed. I, for one, was shocked. Miss Harding was a perfectly adequate companion, if a little ambitious. I had no idea her ambitions ran so high. Seraphina's blood ran cold. This was a direct attack, in her own drawing-room. Before she could form a reply, Alistair's voice came from the doorway. He had not been expected. "Lady Harrington, how kind of you to grace us with your presence, considering how poorly you treated my wife when she was in your care." The dowager turned a mottled shade of red. Alistair walked into the centre of the room, standing beside Seraphina's chair. He looked at Barnaby, his eyes chips of ice. "My cousin finds my marriage fascinating. I find his obsession with it tedious. My wife and I, Lady Harrington, reconnected over our shared grief. Her father, a man I respected, had recently passed. I offered her my protection. That protection is now permanent. I hope that is clear enough for even the smallest minds to comprehend." He turned to his wife and offered his hand. "Seraphina, my love, I believe we have an engagement with the horse master. Ladies!" He pulled her to her feet and led her from the room, leaving behind a scene of absolute social devastation. He did not release her hand until they were in the privacy of his study. He slammed the door, his entire body radiating a controlled fury. "That was unexpected, Your Grace," Seraphina whispered, her heart hammering. "He is digging," Alistair snapped. "Barnaby, he knows something is amiss. And you, fainting at the sight of your former employer." "I didn't faint. I was startled." "It was a weakness. We cannot afford weakness. Now tell me, is there anything else? Any other skeletons in your father's closet that Barnaby might find?" Seraphina flinched. The anger in his voice was impersonal, the anger of a general whose plans are failing, but it still stung. "I told you. The debts. All of them? Are you certain? No. Indiscretions? No failed speculations? No. Other attachments?" The accusation hung in the air. He was asking if she had a lover. "No," she said, her voice low and fierce. "There is nothing. My father's only vice was gambling. The debts I gave you were the sum of it. I have no other secrets, Your Grace." He stared at her, searching her face, his grey eyes stripping her bare. He seemed to be judging the truth of her, not just her words. "Good," he said finally, his voice clipped. "Because Barnaby is close to something. I can feel it. He is speaking to the moneylenders. He is trying to find the one who held your father's largest debt." "Silas Croft," Seraphina breathed, horrified. "Precisely. The one I paid. The one paid on the same day I procured our special license. If Barnaby finds that link, he can prove this was a transaction." "What? What will you do?" Alistair walked to his desk. He opened a drawer and removed a ledger. "I will do what I should have done from the start. I will remove the threat." He turned to her. "I have paid your father's debts, as promised. But I paid them from my personal accounts. Today I will liquidate a portion of your marriage settlement, the £20,000 I promised you, and I will use that to reimburse myself. I will have Mr. Grierson draft the papers." Saraphina stared at him, confused. "How does that help?" "It creates a new story," Alistair explained, his voice quick and strategic. "If Barnaby investigates, he will no longer find that I paid your debts. He will find that you paid them, using the dowry I settled on you after our sudden, romantic engagement. It removes the stain of a transaction. It becomes a gesture of a new husband, cleaning up his wife's unfortunate family affairs." It was brilliant. It was cynical, and it tied her to him in a way that felt chillingly permanent. "You are very thorough, Your Grace. I do not intend to lose my home, Duchess. Now, I suggest you go to Beatrice. You are meant to be viewing a new painter this afternoon. Act as if nothing has happened." She nodded, turning to leave. "Saraphina." She stopped at the door. "You handled yourself well," before I interrupted. It was the closest he had ever come to a compliment. "I am simply playing my part, Your Grace, as instructed." She left his study, but the feeling of his gaze on her back remained. He had defended her. He had called her my love in public. It was all a calculated deception. But as she sat in the carriage beside Beatrice, feigning an interest in landscapes, Saraphina had to force herself to ignore the uncalculated, treacherous warmth blooming in her own chest. The Duke had protected her. He had called her his. And for one terrifying moment, she had wished it were true. The pressure was mounting. Alistair's 30th birthday, the final deadline stipulated in the will, was just 2 weeks away. Mr. Grierson, in his capacity as trustee, had announced he would be spending the final week at Ashworth Park to observe the marital bliss of the Duke and his new Duchess before signing the final papers. "He is coming here to judge us," Alistair stated flatly, pacing the library. The house party had returned to the country, and the air was thick with expectation. "We have done everything you asked," Saraphina said, trying to soothe him. She was arranging flowers in a vase, a small touch of life she had insisted on bringing to the stark, masculine rooms. "We have been the perfect, devoted couple." "It is not enough," Alistair said. "Barnaby will be here. He has been quiet for the last 2 weeks, and that worries me more than his gossip." Saraphina knew he was right. Since the confrontation in London, Barnaby had been the picture of a charming, repentant cousin. But his eyes, whenever they rested on her or Alistair, were cold and watchful. Mr. Grierson arrived, a solemn, walking judgment. With him came the other 2 trustees, Lord Pembroke and Sir Roger Coates, both elderly and humourless. The atmosphere at Ashworth became strained to the breaking point. Alistair was a perfect host, attentive to his wife in a way that was almost believable. He placed her shawl around her shoulders when the evening grew cool. He referenced her opinions in conversation. He touched the small of her back when guiding her through a doorway. Saraphina played her part, smiling, deferring to him, her hand always ready to take his. They were 2 consummate actors in the final act of their play. The night before the Duke's birthday, a formal dinner was held. It was the final test. Saraphina sat at her end of the table, gowned in a deep crimson that Beatrice had sworn made her look regal. The dinner was progressing flawlessly. Mr. Grierson seemed satisfied, Lord Pembroke was half asleep, and Sir Roger was focused only on the excellent port. Then Lord Barnaby rose, lifting his glass. "A toast," he announced, his voice silencing the table. "To our host, my dear cousin, Alistair, and to his beautiful bride, the Duchess." He smiled at Saraphina, a woman of remarkable talents. It is astonishing, is it not, how fate works? How one day a woman can be in desperate straits and the next, a duchess. It speaks to a certain resourcefulness, a talent for seizing an opportunity, no matter how sudden. The insult was unmistakable. He was calling her an opportunist, a gold digger. Saraphina felt the blood drain from her face. Alistair at the far end of the table went rigid. "Barnaby," Alistair warned, his voice a low growl. "Oh, I mean it as a compliment," Barnaby continued, his eyes gleaming with malice. After all, not every woman could so successfully navigate such a rapid change in circumstance. It is almost as if it were a contractual obligation. Contractual. The word hit Saraphina like a physical blow. The air in the room became thin. She saw Mr. Grierson's head snap up, his eyes sharp and focused. She tried to breathe. She tried to smile. But the lie, the pressure, the weeks of performance, and Barnaby's sneering, triumphant face all crashed down on her at once. The room tilted. The candelabra blurred. "Saraphina?" Alistair's voice sounded very far away. She made a small, gasping sound. She saw him rise from his chair, his face a mask of something she couldn't name. Not anger. Something else. Then the world went black. When she woke, she was not in the dining room. She was in her own bed. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, and a single lamp burned by her bedside. A cool, wet cloth was on her forehead. "You fainted." She turned her head. Alistair was sitting in the armchair by her bed. He was not in his formal dinner jacket, but in his shirt sleeves, his cravat loosened. He looked exhausted and terrified. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice rough. I had Dr. Matthews sent for. He has just left. He says it is exhaustion. A nervous strain." "The dinner," she breathed, memory returning. "Barnaby, Mr. Grierson. Oh, Alistair, I have ruined everything." She used his name without thinking. "Hush." He leaned forward, his voice losing its ducal command, becoming something rougher, more human. "Grierson and the others are concerned. I told them you have been unwell for days, that my cousin's boorish behavior was the final straw." "Did they believe you?" "I do not know," he admitted. He ran a hand through his dark hair. "Damn Barnaby. He found something. He must have." He knows," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The shame of her weakness, of her failure, was overwhelming. "I am so sorry. I failed the contract." Alistair looked at her, his expression raw in the lamplight. "To hell with the contract." The word stunned her into silence. He stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the dark, moonlit park. "When you fainted, when you did not answer me, I thought—" He stopped, his back to her. He was struggling for words, this man who was always so precise. "I thought not of the inheritance," he said, his voice low. "I thought not of Barnaby, or Grierson, or this damned house. All I could think was that you were hurt, that he had hurt you." He turned to face her. The winter in his eyes was gone, replaced by a raging, unfamiliar fire. "The thought of you being truly ill, Saraphina, it was intolerable." She stared at him, her heart thudding against her ribs. This was not in the script. This was not part of the arrangement. This man, the Winter Duke, was looking at her as if she were not a chess piece, but the board itself. "I do not understand," she whispered. He walked back to the bed. He did not sit, but stood over her, looking down. "I understand perfectly. I have been a fool. I told myself this was a transaction, a matter of duty. I built a fortress of logic to protect my inheritance. He reached out, his hand hovering over her face. He lightly, tentatively, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was electric. But you, Saraphina, you, with your quiet strength and your love of botany, and your refusal to be managed, you breached the walls. I did not even notice it happening. Your Grace. Alistair, he commanded, his voice soft but firm. My name is Alistair. He was falling in love with her. Or she was falling in love with him. Or most terrifyingly of all, both. The realization was as dizzying as the feint itself. She had been so focused on the lie, she had not seen the truth creeping in at the edges. A sharp knock on the connecting door shattered the moment. Alistair straightened, the Duke's mask slamming back into place. Yes? It was his valet. Your Grace, Mr. Grierson requests your presence in the library. He says it is urgent. He and Lord Barnaby are waiting. Alistair's face hardened into granite. The final battle. He looked at Saraphina. Stay here. Rest. I will handle this. No, she said, swinging her legs out of the bed. She was still in her crimson gown, though it was now crumpled. I will not. He attacked me. He is trying to ruin us. I will be there. You are unwell. I am angry, she corrected, standing up, though she swayed slightly. And I will not hide while that man destroys your home. Alistair looked at her, a new, fierce admiration in his eyes. He offered her his arm. Then let us go, Duchess. Together. The library at Ashworth Park was a vast, two-story room, lined with thousands of books and dominated by a massive, unlit fireplace. It felt like a courtroom. Mr. Grierson and the two other trustees, Lord Pembroke and Sir Roger, stood by the fireplace, their faces grim. Lord Barnaby Crestwood stood near the Duke's desk, a sheaf of papers in his hand, and a look of absolute triumph on his face. When Alistair entered, with Saraphina gripping his arm, Barnaby's smile widened. Ah, the loving couple. How good of you to join us, Duchess. I trust you are recovered from your performance. Barnaby, that is enough, Alistair said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He guided Saraphina to a chair, but she remained standing beside him. Mr. Grierson, Alistair said, addressing the solicitor. It is the middle of the night. This is highly irregular. Indeed, Your Grace, Grierson replied, his voice heavy with disapproval. Lord Barnaby has presented us with evidence. Evidence so serious that it could not wait until morning. Evidence that this marriage, your entire marriage, is a fraud. Saraphina's stomach clenched. That is a damnable lie, Alistair said. Is it? Barnaby stepped forward, holding up a piece of paper. Is it a lie, cousin? Or is it a contract? I have here a copy of a bank draft. A draft for £6,000, drawn from your personal account, made out to a notorious moneylender named Silas Croft. And what is the date on this draft? It is the very same day you procured a special license to marry Miss Saraphina Harding. He produced another paper. And this? A sworn affidavit from a clerk at Grierson and Peabody, confirming that Miss Harding was summoned to your solicitor's office on that day, and left with a contract in hand. He turned to the trustees, his voice ringing with false righteousness. Do you see? He didn't marry her. He bought her. He hired a desperate woman to play the part of his wife for one season, just to satisfy the terms of the will. It is a sham, a mockery of his grandfather's wishes. The trustees looked horrified. Lord Pembroke was wide awake now. Your Grace, Mr. Grierson said, his voice cold as steel. Is this true? Did you pay Miss Harding's debts in exchange for this marriage? Alistair was trapped. If he lied, Grierson, his own solicitor, would know. The clerk's affidavit was damning. If he told the truth, he would lose everything. Ashworth Park, his title's fortune, his entire life. He looked at Saraphina, his face etched with defeat. She saw it all flash before her eyes. Alistair, ruined. Barnaby, smirking, taking the keys to this house. The staff dismissed, the tenants neglected. And she would be cast aside, the woman who had caused it all. But as she looked at Alistair, she felt not fear, but a sudden, clarifying rage. She was done being a pawn. "It was true," Saraphina said, her voice clear and strong in the dead silence of the library. All eyes, including Alistair's, snapped to her. "Saraphina, no," Alistair whispered, grabbing her arm. She ignored him, stepping forward into the lamplight. "What Lord Barnaby says is true. When it began..." She faced Mr. Grierson, her head high. "I was desperate, sir. My father left my sister and me destitute. The Duke, His Grace, offered me a solution. I was to be his Duchess for a season. I was to play a part, and in return, he would save my family from ruin." Barnaby was laughing. "You hear that? A full confession. It's over, Alistair." "I am not finished, Lord Barnaby," Saraphina said, silencing him with the sheer venom in her voice. She turned back to Mr. Grierson. "I accepted the terms of the contract, sir. I intended to be his Duchess for a season. I intended to play my part, take my payment and disappear from his life. I saw him as he saw me, a means to an end. He was a cold, arrogant and dutiful man, and I was a convenient, desperate commodity. That was the arrangement." She paused, taking a shaking breath. She turned to look at Alistair, who was staring at her, his face pale with shock. "But the arrangement, it failed," she said, her voice breaking. She was no longer speaking to the trustees, but only to him. "I was a fool. I thought I could wear these diamonds and live in this house and stand by this man, and not feel anything." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she did not care. "I saw him defend me to women who despised me. I saw him care for his sister. I saw his dedication to this land, to every tenant and every field. And tonight, when I fainted, the look in his eyes, it was not the look of a man fulfilling a contract." She stepped toward him. "I came here to secure my future. I did not expect to find my life. It is no longer a contract, a list example. I cannot be your Duchess for a season because I love him." She said the words, the most terrifying truth of all, in the room full of his enemies. "I love him, Mr. Grierson, and that may not be in the contract, but it is the truth. So you can take the house, Lord Barnaby can have the money, but I am his wife, and that is not a lie." The library was utterly silent. Barnaby looked as if he'd been slapped. Alistair stared at her, his grey eyes shattered, remade. He took a step, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. He reached up and, with a gesture of infinite tenderness, wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. He turned to Grierson. "She is right. Every word she spoke is the truth. The terms of our meeting were unconventional. I was desperate. I was cold. I was wrong." He took Saraphina's hand, lacing his fingers with hers, holding it tightly. "My grandfather's will stipulated that I must be respectably married. It did not stipulate that I must be happy. But by some miracle I do not deserve I am. I am more than married. I am in love with my wife. And if that is not enough to satisfy the terms of the will, then to hell with the will." He raised his wife's hand to his lips and kissed it, a public, profound gesture of devotion. Barnaby sputtered. "This is a performance, a desperate, last-minute performance. They are lying to save the estate." Mr. Grierson, who had been watching the entire exchange, didn't look at Barnaby. His gaze was fixed on the Duke and Duchess. He was an old man, a man of paper and law, but he was not a fool. He saw the way Alistair held Saraphina's hand. He saw the truth in Saraphina's tear-streaked face. "Lord Barnaby," Grierson said, his voice quiet but final, "the will states the Duke must be respectably married. It makes no stipulation on how that marriage came to be, only that it is, in the end, a true union." He straightened his waistcoat. "What I see before me is a true union, the most true I have seen in many years. The terms of the will have been met." He walked to the desk, took a pen, and decisively signed the bottom of the large parchment document that granted Alistair his inheritance. "Congratulations, Your Grace," Mr. Grierson said, bowing to Alistair, and then, more deeply, to Saraphina. "Your Grace." Barnaby's face was a mask of apoplectic rage. "You cannot. This is fraud. I will contest this." "You will do no such thing, Lord Barnaby," Grierson